Me. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. I'm so
Yes.
excited. Thank you so much for joining slightly earlier. I'm glad to see that everybody's cameras are working, and everybody's voices, what the mics are working. We'll give it a few minutes and see how many people will join us. It's still just the three of us. We've had about 90 something RSVPs, so it might be a full room, and I'm hoping that we get quite a few people. All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We will take just a few minutes, about 5 minutes, to let everybody join us in the room, and then we'll begin. Right. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. I think we'll start now, and then everybody else can just join us as we go. The webinar is taking place in a very important context. I think the health of South Africa is something that is on top of our minds as an organization that deals with access to nutritious food. And I think all South Africans, it's a politics of the stomach. It's something that we're all dealing with in one way or the other. And so the title of today's webinar is My Health, My Right. The importance of regulating the food environment to eliminate over and undernutrition in South Africa. The webinar will take place as a Q&A. I have a wonderful panel of experts who are joining me in this important conversation. I will begin by introducing them. We will then have a Q&A session, and then we will open to the floor for questions. We have somebody who's looking at our Q&A box for any questions. So if you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A box. And if you'd like to just engage, you can use the chat box. There is a chance that we might miss your question if you don't put it in the Q&A box. And we really would like to hear what everybody has to say after this. I'd like to then ask my panelists to please turn on their cameras as I introduce them. And in no particular order, I would like to start with the introduction. So Dr. Tamron Frank is a researcher at the University of the Western Cape's School of Public Health in South Africa. She holds a PhD in public health from UWC and a master's degree in nutrition, human rights and governance from the University of Stellenbosch, in collaboration with Makerere University in Uganda and Oslo University. She spent 2022 as a visiting scholar at the University of North Carolina's Global Food Research Program in the USA. She's been a researcher at the UWC School of Public Health for the past 6 years. And she served on the team developing a nutrient profile model and front of pack warning labels for South Africa. She's also involved in child-directed marketing research, and she's working to assessing the effectiveness of the sugary drinks beverage tax in South Africa. Currently, she's serving on the technical working group advising the SA National Department of Health on nutrient profiling. And recently, she's provided guidance to researchers and policymakers from a variety of countries interested in nutrient profiling and front-of-pack warning labeling, including Tanzania, Ghana, Zimbabwe, and Ethiopia. Next is Dr. Edzani Mpapuli. She is a public health medicine specialist currently leading the Grow Great campaign in South Africa. A campaign, she says, with an audacious goal to end stunting by 2030 in South Africa. She has extensive experience in healthcare and leadership, and she's played a pivotal role in the national COVID-19 response, overseeing strategic planning and human resource mobilization for the vaccine rollout. Her diverse background includes directing Kiredi Mobile Health Outreach Project, leading health programs for advanced HIV and drug-resistant TB, and working at various national institutes such as the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. She's done a lot more, but in the interest of time, I think I just highlight those. And then we have, last but not least, our very own programs manager, Petronelle Kruger. And I have to say, soon to be Dr. Petronelle Kruger. Petronelle is an admitted legal practitioner at the High Court of South Africa, and she's previously held positions as a legal researcher at the Constitutional Court of South Africa. Her current research interest is the interplay between human rights and public health. She was a registered PhD student at the University of Witwatersrand, but everything went really well, and so we're excited for her. She's worked extensively in food law and policy during her 4 years at the Wits of School of Public Health. Thank you very much for this lovely panelist, and I think we're going to have a really exciting conversation today. So to just start off, I'd like to ask a question to Tamron. I think we've spoken a lot about ultra-processed foods, but the term is often confusing and a lot of people might not know what we're talking about. So could you please explain what we mean when we talk about ultra-processed foods and why these foods are bad for us?
Sure. So I must say I've been recently leaning more towards the term ultra-processed products rather than ultra-processed foods. And the reason for that is I think food inherently indicates something that is good for us and nutritious for us. And unfortunately, ultra-processed products aren't. So ultra-processed products are not foods that you're going to make at home. They are products that have undergone industrialized processes in a factory. And they're the type of products, if you were to take a package from a shelf and have a look at the ingredients list and you start reading the ingredients, you're going to see names on the ingredient list that are unfamiliar to you, words that you don't know that sound very strange and very scientific. It indicates that there are additives to the products, be it flavorants or preservatives or stabilizers, things that are not naturally occurring in food that have been added to the product. And the unfortunate reality is that most of these products are high in either sugar or salt or saturated fat, or a combination of those nutrients, which are quite unhealthy for us. And they tend to be very high in energy, but they've also been designed and manufactured to be incredibly tasty products, and the types of textures that we enjoy eating, a very crisp bite of a chip, for instance, that, you know, you just want to reach for another one because it's just enjoyable. And the reality is, because of that, we end up eating too much of it. And that is one of the defining features of these ultra-processed products, is that they tend to be very enjoyable, but also usually quite unhealthy for us, and then filled with all of these strange ingredients that we don't know. So if you're not sure, have a look at the ingredient list. And if it's got strange sounding names on it, that's usually a very good indication that it is ultra processed, and it wouldn't be something that you would make at home.
Yeah, definitely. So if we would all be eating, you know, we would not be consuming a lot of these ultra processed products. But you've just done released recent research this year that showed that the diet of low income adults in South Africa consists of 40% ultra processed products. Why is that?
So yeah, we looked at adults living in Khayelitsha and Mount Frere, which indicates, you know, both the urban communities as well as the rural communities in South Africa, and found that ultra-processed products are being consumed quite significantly amongst our low-income South Africans. Predominantly, and our study wasn't about the why behind it, but if, you know, looking at other research that's been done and our knowledge on the topic, the reality is that these products are quite affordable. They tend to be very convenient. So if someone is working a long work day, they've had to take the taxi into work, they've had to travel an hour and a half to get to work, another hour and a half to get home. They don't have a lot of time to prepare food. Given our current situation in South Africa with unreliable access to electricity, and the cost of it as well, one wants to make something that's quick and easy to prepare, and ultra-processed foods tend to fill that gap quite easily. They're shelf-stable. You don't need to worry about refrigerating them, which makes it convenient as well. And because so much has gone into making them tasty, they're also enjoyed by the family. And so that is one of the reasons that we're seeing people are consuming them more. Of course, behind that, if we look at, well, where, you know, 100 years ago, this wasn't the case. Yeah. We can start looking and realizing, well, there's been a whole variety of food corporations that have started making these profits and these products, and they are making them because they make good profits. And they've done a lot of work to market these products so that they've become normalized. It's very normal for us to eat these foods that we didn't eat 50 or 100 years ago, thanks to massive efforts by big food corporations to market and advertise these products to us. So I would say that's the real reason behind why we're eating it. But on a more immediate reason, you know, one does also need to consider the socioeconomic situation and what's convenient for us.
Is it fair to say that the increased overconsumption of UPPs or ultra-processed products linked to the rise in overweight and obesity as well?
Certainly, it's been very, very well documented in a number of countries across the globe, and not only to overweight and obesity, but also to other diseases such as cancer, hypertension, diabetes, heart diseases. So it certainly is very concerning.
Mm. So it is quite a scary thing to think about, given that we often don't have a choice in the food that we eat because what's available to us is what we'll tend to eat. What's also interesting that came out of your research is that the diet now of children is becoming increasingly ultra-processed product dependent. Why is this something that we should be worried about?
So again, our study, we looked at adults, but what we did see was that the younger adults were eating more ultra-processed products than the older adults, and other studies are indicating that children are consuming more of the ultra-processed products. Because we know that ultra-processed products are linked to obesity and overweight and these other non-communicable diseases, the younger a person starts eating them, the larger the risk is that they're going to start developing these diseases at a younger age and have poorer health outcomes. And of course, children don't really have much of a say in terms of what they're eating. And so it's really, really important that we advocate for them and make sure that what is being provided to them is healthy for them. We also find, particularly in children, that ultra-processed products often displace the healthier options that are available. And I'm sure Itzani is going to speak more around the stunting issues, but we know that a lack of micronutrients and healthy foods is linked to undernutrition, stunting, and wasting. And so when those healthy foods are being displaced by the unhealthy ultra-processed products, it certainly creates a problem. And because children don't eat as much as adults, it's more of a risk for children than it is for adults.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Tamarin. That was really insightful and frankly quite scary and worrying, I think, for all of us. Moving on to Edzani. So one of the things that we see and we hear about in South Africa is that we have a dangerous dual situation where we have extreme hunger and stunting and also overweight and obesity. We know that 8 million children in South Africa go hungry every day, and a quarter of children in South Africa, conversely, are stunted. Could you please just explain to us what stunting is and why it's something, why it's dangerous for us to have such high levels in South Africa?
Thanks, Sukisa. Yeah, stunting is an incredibly huge problem in South Africa, and currently we've got over 1.5 million children in South Africa being stunted. And what stunting really is, what really means in simple terms, is that children in their young ages not having enough nutritious food then means that their bodies and brains don't grow well. And then this then damages their ability to learn, to get a good job in life, and to then succeed in life. And scientifically, what stunting is described as is a child who's too short for their age. So who's below -2 standard deviations for their age. But this is not only an issue of height, because sometimes people think, okay, but the child is then just short, because usually children who are stunted still look, chubby chicks, because within stunted children, there's usually, the dual burden of the child being stunted and also being obese. So when you look at the child, you might just look at the child and think, wow, but he's looking very healthy. But once that child, say he's 2 years old, stands next to another 2-year-old, then you see that it's almost just half the height of an average 2-year-old. And that indication of the height also indicates that their brain didn't also grow well. So I mean, we can't take out the brain from the head and measure it, and also the cognitive development and measure it. But that short stature is almost, an indication or a tracer for what's happening in that child's body in terms of all their organs. That the child didn't just get the right nutrition, the right food, especially in the first 1,000 days of their life, to allow them to grow properly in terms of height, and especially for their brain development. Mm. And then you asked a very important question, like, why is this so dangerous? I mean, if we have children whose ability to learn has been damaged, it means we're manufacturing a problem as a country. It means that our economy will forever operate below its full potential, leading to the fragile society that we see today that can really break at any moment. If we look at it, if all these 1.5 million children who are stunted today were not stunted, as adults, they would be able to add at least another 90 billion per year to the economy. And according to the World Bank in South Africa, children only reach 43% of their full potential. And a huge part of that choking of their potential is because of stunting. Because obviously, if your brain didn't develop well, then it becomes like a pipeline for problems for the country. It means that this becomes a child who struggles in school, who struggles to read. And then we see the statistics, 80% of children not being able to read for meaning. And then it builds on to, children not passing matric. And we usually want to intervene there by matric when it's already too late. And it's in the very critical first 2 years of a child's life where we need to nip the bud on the problem of stunting. But it then obviously creates children who grow up to be adults who are unemployable, who are unskilled, because they can't just learn beyond that. Their potential has been snuffed before their life even began. And this obviously means that once they're unemployed, their future is usually criminality. And we are all have high walls and scared to even drive at night because of crime. But stunting is one of the manufacturing houses of criminals, because most of the time these kids can't do anything else in their life besides crime. And that is why stunting is so dangerous and needs to be addressed urgently.
It's interesting when you mention some of these potential outcomes, because a lot of the times when we think of issues like this, I think we individualize it, but these are societal issues and they affect each and every one of us in a very serious way. So one of the most interesting things that you just mentioned is that obesity and stunting can coexist together. We know that 13%, which is about 1 in 8 children under the age of 5 are overweight or have overweight. What are the outcomes from childhood obesity, and why is this something that we also need to worry about and think about quite deeply?
Yeah, so yes, it's true. Like stunting and obesity usually coexist, and they usually also have the same consequences in terms of the health of the child when they grow up to be an adult. So most children who are either obese or stunted in childhood, whose obesity into adulthood, then grow up to be at very high risk of getting chronic illnesses, especially high blood pressure, high cholesterol, which are all risk factors for heart disease. They at a much higher risk of getting type 2 diabetes, getting breathing problems like asthma and sleep apnea, where it's like you're choking in as you sleep, and also joint problems as they grow up, so arthritis and not being able to be fully active, and including many other risk factors like other specific cancers that you're predisposed to because of obesity, and generally I think we're all very aware of mental health issues, and childhood obesity, especially when it persists into adulthood, is linked to psychological problems such as anxiety and depression, low self-esteem, and just in general, a low self-reported quality of life. And we know as adults who have children and schools how bad bullying is, and when a child is obese, then that becomes even a much bigger problem. And then there's also, when they grow up as adults, and even now we're seeing much higher risks of children, getting strokes and high blood pressure, things that we didn't see a lot of in children are starting to show up, and it's very much linked to the ultra processed foods and those consequences, because that's obviously the diet that a majority of this is dictated by diet. That's why these children end up being obese, and because they are consuming a lot of these ultra processed foods, because obesity and stunting, are quite linked, and they're usually linked with with not only just the diet, but the root cause is usually poverty, because then that determines the food choices and the quality of food that you're able to access, especially the parents and children will obviously get most of the time the least in the family, or they will get full quickly from the food that are bought, and poor parents or caregivers usually go for quick filling foods which are high in starch and ultra processed, and this then leads to this problem of obesity, and then the social environment where you're living in an unsafe place where you can't exercise, and it's unsafe to exercise. And also this type of schools where the kids go to, there's also no sports facilities to allow them to be active. So there are all these factors that contribute to the children being obese, but then there's serious critical consequences for them as they grow older, and then it has consequences on the health system, because all these children who grow up, who obese children or stunted children, grow up then to become adults who have these chronic illnesses which cost the health system a lot of money.
Definitely. I mean, I think you've already answered my next question, which is that nutrition obviously is the foundation of child survival, and it's very how important would you say it is for us to actually get a grip on the state of the nutrition or the food environment in South Africa?
No, I think it's critical, and it is the underlying issue, and I think it probably should be the most critical political issue that's being discussed right now, because they always say that a hungry nation is an angry nation, and our food environment is determined by the food prices, and as we've seen huge increases in the consumer price inflation, like over the past few years, and in South Africa it's crazy. There's foods that have increased by over 60% over the past 6 years. So food like potatoes, eggs, tomatoes, rice, mincemeat, full cream milk have in price by over 60% in the past few years, and there's been 73% increase in the average cost of the household food basket, from about 3,000 in 2018 to now 5,000. And I mean, if we just think about the food poverty line, which is now around 760, and we think about the child support grant, even if a child was to use all the child support grant on food, it would not be able to meet their basic nutritional needs. And that's the kind of environment where we find ourselves in, and people being pushed to then purchase, high carbohydrates, quick filling foods, ultra processed foods, and the food environment is also littered with marketing of these ultra processed foods, which also then influences and reinforces unhealthy food choices. And there's also then reduced consumption of vegetables and fruits because of the associated food prices, but also reduced consumption of indigenous fruits and vegetables, especially in rural areas. People are wanting now to go and buy things instead of grow and eat the indigenous vegetables that they grew up eating, which would cost them nothing if they ate them, because the food environment dictates that is not fashionable to eat. This is what you should eat. Same with issues like breastfeeding, and so I think that the food industry and the marketing of unhealthy foods has a lot to do with the food choices, but ultimately poverty and not having enough money dictates that we choose the cheaper, unhealthier options.
Thank you very much, Edzani. And I know we're coming up to elections, and I think what this conversation is making me think about is how angry we all should be, how indignant, and how much, and how we should demand more and better from our policymakers and government. But we know, now, Petronel, that these are, we know that these are complex issues and they require a myriad of different interventions. But there are things that could be done in that regulations are some of the low-hanging fruit that government could actually implement to kind of arrest and solve some of these problems. Can you talk to us about the importance of regulating the food environment in South Africa?
Absolutely. I mean, what Tamarin and Adzane was really putting out was sort of a dual problem. We have too much of something that's really bad, and we have too little of the resources for people to get what's good. And how would you tackle this situation? It means you need enabling policies. So we're talking about ensuring that people can actually have enough money to purchase food. So we need people to have access to proper grants, and grants is always an issue. And when you speak to a lot of people, they have this misunderstanding about grants, and they make it very political. But I think our two previous speakers makes a fantastic point that even if you're not the one that's directly benefiting from a grant, surely we all want to live in a country where your neighbor is well fed, where you are safe, where there's economic growth. So there's a lot of benefits, even if you're not the person who's that impoverished that you need access to that grant, that we need to start opening up that conversation and saying that grants is really an intervention for each and every South African, because it's reshaping the way our country functions. And that's why it's probably the most important political issue we have right now, because it's not just a moral issue, and I mean, it definitely is. As people, we need to be invested in seeing other people prospering. I mean, if you can look at someone who's hungry and that doesn't bother you, then you need to do some introspection. But even if you want to take a cold, dispassionate look at grants, that's something that really just benefits us economically on paper, in terms of our development as a country, in terms of making us competitive. So that's something we need to focus on. And we really need to get out of this rut when we talk about grants and it comes time to the budget speech, we see things like 20 Rand and 50 Rand increases. That's peanuts. And honestly, that's actually insult to all South Africans. We need to see an actual real move towards something like universal basic income grant. And again, people try and make it political. But for example, after COVID-19, we saw that they had something that worked sort of similar to our social relief and distress grant in the US, and there was real economic growth. So that's very important. And we need to make sure that we subsidize healthy foods and that we make sure that farmers aren't being kicked out of the market by big organizations who only care about profit, and who can push them out. I mean, we all know sometime in our life there was a mom and pop shop down the road and it's been replaced by a big food retailer, because we keep seeing these really big Walmarts merging with other big companies. Now we have even bigger and bigger food organizations, and free companies, control 60% of the South African bread market. And then when they decide, and which they have in the past, to form a cartel and manipulate our prices, there's really very little we can do. So those are the things that we need to look at. And that means reining in also these corporations. And then we come to the restrictive policies. So when we make food available, we also need to make sure that we restrict people who provide bad food and who manipulate us into purchasing that food. I always say there's at least 200 registered soda companies in South Africa, but I challenge everyone on this call to think of 20 brands. That's not companies, because companies own more than one brand. And then you have to ask yourself, but why do I not see the local Durban producer who's, making a product from their garage and who is actively trying to scale up and give jobs to the community? But I'm seeing 20 different variations of Coca-Cola's branding in shops. And that's because, again, we need to restrict these companies and we need to stop them from doing things that's anti-competitive and making deals with other big companies to say, hey, we'll put your food at eye level with the children, so that when we're in the shops and moms and dads are tired and they want to go home and they're feeling really bad, they go, you know, it's fine. I'll purchase this little chocolate for you. But then back at the ranch, it's a Nestle chocolate. And, you know, there was child slavery in that supply chain. So we need to think about that. And there are some very easy interventions already that as the public we can support. I mean, we need to support increased excise taxation of bad products, the so-called sin taxes, and that includes the so-called sugar tax, right? We need to be more proactive with that. And then front of pack labeling, the Department of Health has said, you know, here is a possible way for us to, in the very least, make sure that people in South Africa have access to information, which in and of itself is such an important goal for us to push. I mean, that is such a wonderful civil and political right that as a country like South Africa, I mean, we're celebrating Freedom Day coming up, where one of the hallmarks of apartheid South Africa was a repression of media and information. So, you know, for one, as a South African, I want to know what's in my food. I want to know what's in my car. We should be able to know the things we're purchasing. But more than that, we've seen that front of pack labeling actually works. It's been incorporated on almost every continent. There's been several studies that show that it has a real impact. So, for example, in Chile, along with other interventions, you know, the front of pack label and restrictions on marketing to children, which, by the way, our policy also has, and what can be sold in schools, we've seen longitudinal studies that show, hey, kids are actually eating better things because of this really simple intervention. And what does it cost?
Yeah. I love that you mentioned the front of pack warning labels. And I think for a lot of people, it's not quite clear what it is. So could you just explain for the audience what exactly it is and what it means for ordinary consumers should this regulation be ratified and passed?
Absolutely. So it's a fantastic intervention, and it basically is the Department of Health saying, we're going to make one small change. We're going to change the way that companies are forced to label their product. It shouldn't cost them anything, right? Because they just need to reprint their normal label. And what they need to do is they need to use evidence that was developed in South Africa. It's called the nutrient profile model that sets out, hey, it's really difficult for us to understand. I personally, and I work in this space, I mean, I know if something ends on an O's, that's probably bad. But as you know, lately, everything has an X in it. So people smarter than me have gone and they said, hey, you know what? If it contains this much salt, we should start to worry. If it contains this much or more sugar, we should start to worry. And the way we're going to tell you that is we're going to do the heavy lifting, make this assessment for you. And then on the front of the pack, we're just going to put a little triangle that says, you know, be aware of this. This product contains too much or possibly too much of this, and you as the consumer should be aware. And I mean, it follows normal labeling restrictions that you see in other companies. There's certain height, you know, it has to be a certain level on the product. It has to be a certain size. None of these things are strange. All countries have regulations on labeling. It's just adding an additional layer of consumer literacy, which is really important. And as we said, we've already seen other countries do very successfully. And then if a product contains that label, there are certain restrictions, things that you would think would already have been in place. So if a product is unhealthy or harmful or possibly harmful, we're saying you can't specifically market this to children. So we don't want kids, and this feels so common sense, right? But today this happens. We don't want our children eating things that are bad for them. We understand when it comes to voting that, you know, okay, maybe kids should be 18 before we let them decide who to vote for. We understand when it comes to contracts, you know, before 18, you can't enter into a contract. We even have in criminal law. I mean, if you're a 7-year-old child and you know, steal an apple in the shop, we all laugh and we're like, you know, kids are kids, because we understand children are still developing and they need that space. But magically, when it comes to food, which is really manipulative, like it tastes good, it looks nice, it has sounds, it has magical effects. You know, my favorite cartoon characters promoting it. My favorite football player is on the cover. We allow those things to influence how children eat. So this regulation says, if it's a bad product, we cannot target children in this express way. So that is an absolutely fantastic intervention. And the other thing that's really important is that if it contains the little triangle that says, "Ooh, let's worry a little bit here," you can't make a nutrition claim on that label, which is very important because these nutrition claims are so confusing. If you look at any breakfast cereal, at this rate, all you have to do is eat breakfast cereal and you'll be a genius and you'll be an Olympic star and all of your friends will love you and you'll have a recording contract when you're 5 years old. So it's really just putting in really common sense restrictions to help us as South Africans, you know, decide what we do and not want to eat and what we want to give our children to eat, which I think is important.
For sure. I mean, I think when you mentioned the R word, which is regulation, a lot of people go up in arms. Sometimes they accuse the government of trying to be a nanny state or trying to take away the rights of the food producers. But the biggest topic that came up last week and a little bit this week is the whole Nestle sugar scandal. So if you've missed it, is that Nestle was found to have been adding high levels of sugar in baby food that was sold in low-income developing countries, and in the global north, the same foods contained 0 levels of sugar. And one of the things that could be argued was that because the global north had stronger regulations, they were able to actually protect their children. And so when we talk about these R words, I think we need the regulations, we need to have strong regulations actually to protect us from things like this. I just want to talk to you, Pechinel, about why self-regulation doesn't work, because that's often something that is brought up by people to say, you know, we will make these changes ourselves, we will monitor ourselves, and, you know, we're pledging that this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, so self-regulation has been studied until kingdom comes, and almost all studies find that self-regulation simply doesn't work. And if you think about it, just from a practical perspective, if companies were properly regulating themselves, they would not object to external regulation, right? Because clearly they're doing what they need to do to the extent that they're supposed to do it. But self-regulatory mechanisms are oftentimes very diluted, have very little penalties and sanctions, and have really like broad descriptions of what's wrong. So, for example, in South Africa, we have a body called the Advertising Regulatory Board. Now, what product do you think is the most regulated? Because it's a self-regulatory body. Well, at this stage, your pets are being protected more in terms of what they're eating than your children are, because pet food has a really long list of sort of regulatory interventions. Why? Because dog moms like me had a bee in their bonnet and lost their minds, and we demanded that pet food should be regulated more. We should see the same for children. There is a code called the Food and Beverage Code, but, you know, for example, it doesn't protect children up until 18. It protects children until 12. And if you look at self-regulatory mechanisms universally and worldwide, this is very normal, where companies magically go, you know, when you're 13, you should fend for yourself, which is absolutely ridiculous. And it contains really broad descriptions to make it impossible to actually enforce. Because what does it mean that you're not allowed to specifically appeal to the innocence of a child? If things are framed broadly like that, in the way that these regulations often are, it becomes impossible to enforce. And like I said, if you're doing it yourself, you won't object to the government stepping in and saying, cool, we just want to write it down to make sure that if anyone else isn't doing it, that we can actually have a stick to hold them to task. So that's why we need to have mandatory, independently led regulation, so that we have independent people telling us what evidence to use for this regulation. And we have a government department that actually has the ability to sanction companies. Because it's in high school when you were supposed to grade yourself and your friends. My friends and myself, we always got A+, right? Because when you have to evaluate yourself, you're always doing the right thing. And that's sort of the way self-regulation works. It was when we were in LO and we were giving each other marks for our posters.
Yeah, definitely. We're almost nearing the end of the Q&A session, and I just want to remind everyone to please add their questions in the Q&A box. You'll be given an opportunity to ask some questions to the panelists. And I think I'd just like to ask everybody who's here on in the webinar, how has your food consumption changed? I know for myself as a kid, takeaways and UPPs were often seen as a treat, so it were things we couldn't afford. But now, as an adult who's, busy, I know that I have increased quite substantially. So it'll be interesting to see where we are just as a cohort in the group here. I think I have one final question for you, Pechanel, and that is, it's very easy for us to get overwhelmed and angry and quite frustrated about this issue, but how should we as ordinary South Africans also engage in order to make the changes that we want to see for ourselves and for vulnerable children as well?
We need to engage with our democratic rights. So right now we have a great opportunity. It's time to vote. Go out, do the heavy lifting, read that political party's manifesto, look at what they say about health and what they say about subsidies, and look if they're pandering to big corporations because they want to make sure they get nice donations next time around. And if that's daunting, you'll see that major media organizations are doing little short articles to be like, well, here is a breakdown of the different political parties' views, for example, on health. And you can go and look at that to make sure you have an informed vote. But democracy doesn't stop at voting. It's a continuous right we can always exercise. And that means that when regulations come up and it's time for the public to make their voice heard, write in. There's no format requirement. You can literally, as a South African, say, hey, you know what, this FOPL thing looks great because I want to know what's in my food. And you shouldn't feel hindered because maybe you don't have the technical language. I have personally seen how ordinary South Africans write in and they just, share a personal story about why they support a regulation. And that's something that each and every person can do. So, spend half an hour less each day on X and Instagram and Facebook, and see what's happening in your government departments, in your local government, and see what the Department of Health is saying, and take those 5 minutes to write the email to say, this is my view. That's really important.
Thank you very much. I see we have a shy group of people here. I'd like to just let you know that nobody here bites. It's a safe space. Feel free to just ask any question. I have one before we go into the Q&A box, and that's towards Tamron. One of the interesting things and an interesting term that I've heard recently was something called multi-morbidity. Could you just tell me what that is and how that differs from, what we know about obesity and overweight?
So multi-morbidity, I guess, very basically just refers to having more than one condition at a time. So it might be you are living with obesity and you are living with diabetes type 2. That would be two conditions, and that then is referred to as multi-morbidity. In the South African context, where we know we have very high levels of HIV and TB, we often find that those conditions are also at the same time linked to somebody living with obesity, for instance. And because the body is then under a lot more stress, there are a number of diseases or illnesses that the body is trying to fight. It means that the body is put under a lot more stress and strain. And so, unfortunately, as a result of that, the risk of having worse outcomes, becoming more sick, is higher if you have multimorbidity. And we've certainly been seeing a lot more of that with the rise of ultra-processed products and the increased levels of obesity that is linked to that, and then the diseases and conditions linked to obesity.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. We have a question for Petronelle. Are there any organizations that make it a point to make food more accessible, particularly in places where UPPs are consumed predominantly?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, we'd like to think that HEALA, we have definitely an organization that promotes food justice. So please feel free, sorry for the plug, but to go onto our website and follow us on our socials. But in terms of specifically focusing on ultra-produced products, sorry, it's been a long day. No, I don't think there is an organization in South Africa that just focuses on that. And I think the reason for that is because, you know, civil society and organizations are alive to the reality that it's really impossible to tackle the food issue by just looking at one side, which is, you know, restricting a particular type of food without acknowledging, you know, that there is this whole other side, which pushes this problem, which is that people are hungry and that there is an affordability issue. So you'll see that most of the food organizations would focus on either the food security angle or would do both. But I would say that as HEALA, we have picked up more this ultra-produced product advocacy, and hopefully it's something that will see a lot more growth, and we'll see that policymakers pick up a bit more of an appetite to regulate this.
Thank you so much. It's only you and your organization have an audacious plan to get rid of stunting by 2030. Can you talk to us about what some of the things that you're looking at and how you're planning on achieving this goal?
Thanks, Ukiswa. Yeah, it is an audacious goal, and it takes all of us, you know, all of society to come together and achieve this. And as Grow Great, you know, directly what we're trying to do, and one of our biggest campaigns has been to push government and business to put a double discount on 10 nutritious foods that we've identified, and you know, we also view it as a way to signal the population to saying, okay, these are good food choices that you can buy, which are also friendly on the pocket, and that's one particular part that we've been. It's ultimately to get us to an affordable food basket for the country, because I think we just realized that without the food being affordable, without tackling the affordability issue, then we're not going to get anywhere in terms of enabling the population to be able to buy food for themselves and their children, which is healthy. So we're still pushing on that, but business is yet to come to the party as always, but we continue to push on that. So foods like dried beans, amasi, full cream milk, fortified maize meal, lentils, 4-in-1 soup mix, vegetable soup mix. So things that are really so high in protein, peanut butter, and things that could also add to a baby's porridge to help to supplement the protein, and understanding that most of the time families, when they don't have money, the first thing that falls out is the proteins. And we've got rice and fortified maize meal and rice there because those are commonly consumed staples in many households. And we have seen that their prices have also been skyrocketing. As much as all these foods are VAT exempt foods, their prices have skyrocketed, and it's then again pushing people towards ultra processed foods, magwinya, other things that they can buy quickly, that are quickly filling. So that's one of the things that that's one of our communication campaign and advocacy campaign that we're busy with. And then one of the campaigns and that we pushing is for the adoption of, for the extension of the child support grant into pregnancy. I think we all understand that a child's life doesn't start the day that they're born, and issues like stunting start in the womb, and actually they precede that to the prenatal state of the mother before they fall pregnant. But in pushing for that, we're really saying there are many things that happen when a pregnant woman, when a woman falls pregnant, and most of the time for poor women, they usually do physical labor, right? They like working as helper.
Have we lost Idzani? Okay. We'll give her some time to catch up. Idzani, we've lost you. I have a question here from Jenny Pena, and she's talking about the R3337, which is the front of pack regulation. And I'll open this to Tamron because you've worked extensively and quite closely with the National Department of Health on this, and then at Petronal as well. Do you believe that the proposed regulation on labeling is adequate to educate the consumer on the product that it's put on?
So part of the development of those specific labels that are on the products involved first doing focus group discussions with South Africans living in rural and urban areas, different education levels, different literacy levels, to identify what would be suitable icons, pictures to have on the actual warning label. And that was important given that we've got 11 different official languages in South Africa, and that we have low literacy levels. So we wanted to make sure that there would be something to be able to identify, even if you couldn't read or English wasn't the language that you spoke, because in South Africa on food packaging, English is the language that packages are written in. And so that was developed, you know, initially there was a whole sample of different images developed and tested until the final ones were identified. Thereafter, there was a randomized control trial, which basically is just a very scientific study that looks at different people, and it was representative. So it included South Africans across the country, again, at different education levels, different income levels, different literacy levels, different races. And then this warning label was tested alongside two other labels, the traffic light and the guideline daily allowance GDA, which are two that we sometimes see being used in South Africa, to see which one was understood the best. And participants were shown one of these labels on different products without any information as to what the product was. And consistently, participants who saw the warning label products were able to identify those products as unhealthy much better than the participants who saw one of the other warning labels. And that was, you know, when this is actually implemented, we will hope that there will be a fair amount of public education and awareness, you know, to ensure that people know what these labels are. But even without any information or background, the labels actually were very effective at helping people to identify what products were unhealthy. So I think we can fairly confidently say that, yes, they are able to perform that role.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. I have a question here that I'd like to direct to Petronal, and I think you might be able to answer. Is from Judith King. Judith says, my PhD studies on corporate governance and health law reform and human rights. So with Coca-Cola's essay response to the HPL as a case study, why aren't we using strengthening the King Code for insisting on a communication approach to businesses' due diligence in terms of their processes and products not harming people? Jesus says, strictly speaking, society gives these companies a license to operate, and we should institute regulations that bear sanction of withdrawing that license if the companies don't comply with specific obligations in this regard.
I mean, I think that's a great comment. Judith, I can't really add too much more to that. I think that's exactly correct. We should hold companies to task that they have a more communitarian approach. And right now we see that companies still very much view their mandate in the old school way, that they exclusively are profit driven. And even if we have local codes that say, you know what, that can't be the case anymore. I mean, we just had the situation with Nestle right after the scandal broke, that there was a shareholder recommendation that said they need to change their food portfolio, and the shareholder simply voted against it. But I think what your point says really well is that when we think about food, we need to think about food companies very closely and how we regulate that and how we view their actions. I mean, I, for one, personally think that corporate social responsibility should be taxable and should be viewed as a marketing activity, and that we need to, as the public, also understand it as such. So I think there is a lot of work that we can do there. And I mean, earlier we were talking about the price of eggs going up and but then when the Competition Commission brings out their report that shows, you know, what the input prices are, you see that the input prices of eggs haven't changed, but that the actual retail prices have changed phenomenally, or there was a slight bump, but then retailers just added a whole chunk extra profit. So I think that's something that we need to start thinking about, is that ultimately we need to start holding these corporations accountable. And, you know, let's start with Nestle. They were blatantly pushing sugar into babies' foods. I can't think of anything more abhorrent than that. And then they had the audacity to say, but, you know, not in the rich countries because we might get in trouble. So, you know, let's insist that our Department of Health does the same thing that happened in India and Bangladesh and Nigeria, which is they need to be investigated and there needs to be some consequences. And let's be angry.
Yeah. Thanks for that. We have a question from Norma, and Norma says, thank you for the webinar. To what extent is this kind of information and curricula being shared with schools, and which organizations are working with community food literacy? And I think as HEALA, we're doing a little bit of that work in our corner of the world, and perhaps given that we don't have such a wide scope, we can't reach everybody, but does anybody on the panel know, perhaps have any insights on what other organizations Norma can reach out to? Yes.
Thanks, Zukisa. Can you hear me now? I think I dropped off.
Yes, you're back now.
I'm back now. Okay. Yes. So I think one of the arms for Grow Great is that we work in communities. We work with community healthcare workers who are government employees, and part of what we train them to do is being able to, you know, provide nutritional counseling to the clients that they see, especially particularly targeting pregnant women and mothers of children under the age of 2. So you can link up with us, and we also engage with mothers through another program which targets pregnant women and babies by offering antenatal and postnatal classes, which again focuses a lot on nutritional education and nutritional diversity for moms, and, you know, so she can link us with us, and we will be able to see how we can collaborate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I think we're almost done. I know the webinar was scheduled for an extra minute, and I always say that it's better to have a little bit more time than too little. So I will give the panelists just a few seconds to just close up and make their closing statements on what we've had the conversation about. We will then send the webinar out to everybody who's done, and we'll make some closings to say thank you and a way forward. Thanks. So Tamron, you can go first.
Thanks so much, Ziki, for arranging this. And yes, I think, my reflections on our conversation today are certainly that we need to be making sure that we are putting pressure on governments to ensure that they are regulating the ultra-processed product industry, because it is harmful to our health, it's harmful to the health of our children if things continue in the way that it is happening at the moment. But there is hope. There is possible things that can be done that can change the course of direction in terms of our obesity levels in the country, and that will also help for underweight and stunting. And so we need to make our voice heard and really put pressure on government to ensure that there are better policies in place to protect our children's rights.
Thank you very much, Tamron. Idzani?
Thank you, Zukisa. Yeah, I think from my side, it's just really to reiterate what Tamron is saying and to push government, and not only government, but also big business to be responsible and to understand that adequate nutrition is a basic condition for life, for human development and social stability. And we need to protect that nutrition space. We need to protect the food space and ensure that our children and not only our children, but also ourselves have an environment that is conducive for us to eating healthy. And as a closing statement, I think just really from Grow Great, push for food affordability. And one of the ways to do that is to really ensure that pregnant women are able to afford nutritious food. And please help us and join us by signing our petition on the child on extending of the child support grant into pregnancy. You can find that on our Grow Great website, www.growgreat.co.za, or on our WhatsApp line 060-0733-3333, and be part of the solution. Let's get our children the right food from right when they are in their mother's wombs.
It's on, if you could add the petition link and the number also just in the chat, so everybody who would like to have it has access to it. Thank you very much for that. And then Petrona, your closing statement, please.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Two very important things. The first thing is that poverty and ill health is everyone in this country's problem and not just the people suffering from it. And we need to start thinking about it in that way. And the second thing is, do not let anyone tell you that their corporate profits are more important than the people of this country's health.
Definitely. Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much to the panel for such an engaging and insightful conversation. I think this is just the start of many to come, because this issue isn't going to be solved overnight, and I think it needs all of us to commit. So everyone from different sectors of civil society, from the government, from business, to come into play, because this is something that we can see what we're looking at in our future, and it's incumbent on us to actually do something to kind of arrest and improve the outlook. If you would like to get in touch with HEALA, please, you can visit our website, HEALA.org. Our social media platforms are HEALA_SA, and we can continue the discussion there. After the webinar, we'll be sending everybody a Q&A and a survey to help us, improve in the future for our future webinars. And again, thank you to the panelists, and thank you to everybody who's participated here. And we really look forward to hearing from you and engaging with you in any future engagements that we have. Thank you very much.